My name is Evelyn Hartman. I'm 68 years old, recently retired, and I've lived alone in a quiet corner of Vermont for most of the past 2 decades. My house is small but warm, and I know every creak in the floorboards by heart. Most days are quiet now. I wake up early, feed the birds, make my tea, and sit by the window with a crossword puzzle I may or may not finish. It's not an exciting life, but it's mine, and there's peace in that. This week felt different, though. I'd been counting down the days, folding little outfits into my suitcase, planning out which scarf would go best with my coat. I was flying out to see my son Nathan for the first time in nearly a year. He lives in Chicago now, always busy, always working. He used to call every Sunday. Lately, it's been more like once a month. Still, when he texted me a few weeks ago and said I should come visit, I didn't even hesitate. I booked the ticket that same night. I even splurged on a nonstop flight because I didn't want to risk delays or missed connections. There was this picture in my mind. I kept holding on to something simple. A crowded terminal, me wheeling my little red suitcase through the arrival doors, and there he is. He'd be holding one of those silly cardboard signs that says, Mom. Not because he needs to, just to make me laugh. He always used to say I had the kind of laugh that made people turn their heads like maybe something good was happening. I packed a small gift for him. Nothing much, just a pair of those thermal socks he always liked and a jar of my homemade apple butter. The same kind I used to sneak into his dorm fridge every visit freshman year. It's funny how moms never stop packing like their kids might still get cold. I also tucked in an old photo of us from when he was 8. We were standing in front of the first snowman he ever built. His mittens were too big, and he insisted the carrot nose was crooked on purpose. I must have stared at that picture for 10 minutes before zipping up my suitcase. It was wrinkled and fading at the edges, but I loved how small his hand looked wrapped around mine. He had this fearless grin, the kind you only see on children who haven't learned what disappointment feels like. The night before the flight, I couldn't sleep. I sat up by the window in my flannel robe, sipping chamomile and watching the snow fall across the porch light. It reminded me of the year we got snowed in for Christmas and played Scrabble by flashlight when the power went out. He was 12 then. He beat me with the word tranquility. I didn't even care. I just remember thinking how fast he was growing and how every version of him was already slipping into the next. In the morning, I checked my bag twice, made sure my boarding pass was in the front pocket, and left a light on in the kitchen. I don't know why I do that when I travel. Maybe I just like the thought of something waiting for me to come home. At the airport, I found my gate early and sat quietly reading a book I wasn't really following. My heart kept pacing ahead of the minutes. I wasn't nervous. I was just ready. Ready to see him. Ready to be reminded that even if we don't talk as much, we're still us. There's something about being a mother that never quite switches off no matter how grown your child is. I imagined his hug. He gives those firm two-arm kind of hugs where he pats your back like he's grounding you. He'd say something like, "Took you long enough." Mom and I'd roll my eyes and pretend to be annoyed. The boarding call came over the speakers. I stood, grabbed my bag, and smiled a little to myself. It had been a long time coming, and no matter how many things had changed since the last time we saw each other, I held on to one thing. He was my boy, and I was going to see him. The plane landed smoothly, and as soon as the seatbelt sign blinked off, I felt that little flutter in my chest. I gathered my coat, picked up my bag, and walked out with the crowd, my eyes already scanning for Nathan. I pictured him standing just outside the security barrier, hands in his jacket pockets, maybe with that boyish grin that used to light up his whole face. The airport buzzed with movement, voices echoing from every corner, but none of them belonged to him. I walked a little slower, glancing left and right, thinking maybe he was just behind a pillar or running late. I checked my phone, expecting at least a message saying where to find him. There was nothing, no text, no call. I sat on a bench near the baggage claim, balancing my suitcase by my leg. People came and went, families reunited with laughter, couples kissed quickly, luggage forgotten in the moment. I waited, trying not to look like I was waiting. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. I told myself it was traffic. Maybe he was circling. Maybe he'd dropped his phone or gotten lost in the parking garage. But I knew that airport. It wasn't big enough to get lost in, and he knew my flight time. I had sent it twice. I called him. 4 rings then, voicemail, just his voice, chipper and distant, asking to leave a message. I didn't. I just stared at the screen, then slipped the phone back into my coat. I pulled my scarf a little tighter and looked at the doors. The snow outside had started to fall thicker. It looked like it might stick. My fingers curled around the handle of my suitcase. He wasn't coming. I knew it. I knew it long before I let myself believe it. When I stepped outside, the cold air hit harder than I expected. It stung my cheeks and made my eyes water, but I didn't cry. I flagged down a cab. The driver barely glanced at me as he popped the trunk. I climbed into the back seat, my knees stiff, my breath shallow. "Where to, ma'am?" I gave him the address without thinking. The one Nathan grew up in, the one I never changed because I always believed he'd come back to it someday. The windows fogged a little as we drove. The city sparkled with Christmas lights, windows glowing with warmth I couldn't quite feel. I sat in silence watching it blur by. Inside the house, nothing had changed. Same pictures on the wall, same winter candles on the table. My suitcase sat unopened by the door. I took off my coat and stood there for a minute, unsure where to go next. I didn't feel angry, not really, just something softer, something heavier. I sat on the edge of my bed, the floral comforter bunched beneath me. My hands were still curled like I was holding something that had long since slipped through. I stared at the floor, not moving. There was a strange calm in the quiet, the kind that comes not when things are okay, but when you stop pretending they are. It wasn't just that Nathan forgot. It wasn't even that he didn't come. It was the way I had still expected him to. That was the part I couldn't shake. That after everything, some part of me still waited like I always had, still believed I mattered enough to be met at the gate. I didn't unpack. I didn't even take off my shoes. I just sat there, the ticking of the hallway clock the only sound in the house. The silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt familiar. And that might have been the saddest part. I lost my husband when Nathan was 8. One moment he was standing at the sink making coffee, the next, he was gone. A heart attack, they said, sudden and unfair, like most things that matter too much. Nathan didn't cry at the funeral. He just sat there holding my hand, his fingers sticky from the jelly sandwich he didn't finish. I remember brushing his hair with my fingers, telling him we were going to be okay, even though I didn't believe it. We didn't have much. Just the house and what little savings we'd put aside, most of it already spoken for by the mortgage. I took extra shifts at the hospital, filled in when others called out, said yes to everything, even when I was running on fumes. I learned how to make one chicken last 3 days, how to sew his sneakers when the soles wore thin. I skipped dinners sometimes just so there'd be enough for his lunch the next day. When he had trouble in math, I didn't yell. I found a neighbor's son to tutor him twice a week. I made flashcards and stuck them to the fridge, cheered him on like he was solving world hunger every time he got one right. The year he broke his arm skateboarding, I spent the night in that plastic hospital chair humming the same lullaby he used to fall asleep to as a toddler. He rolled his eyes at me, pretended he didn't hear it, but he didn't ask me to stop. By the time he was 16, he barely said thank you anymore. He came home late, rolled his eyes at my questions, slammed his door when I reminded him about curfew. I told myself it was just a phase. At 23, he came home with a dream in his eyes and a laptop under his arm. He had a plan, a pitch, and a look on his face I hadn't seen since he was a little boy. He said he just needed a little help, a bit of seed money to get started. I didn't even flinch. I pulled it from my early retirement savings and handed him a check. When the banker warned me it was risky, I just smiled and said, "Dreamers need wings." The app didn't take off. The investors faded. The team fell apart. He blamed himself, then he blamed the market. I never blamed him. He came back with his shoulders lower and his voice quieter. I made his favorite dinner that night, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, the whole thing. He barely touched it. He looked tired. I told him we'd figure it out. We always had. I meant it too, because that's what I did. I figured things out so he didn't have to feel them too deeply. Looking back, I used to say I didn't mind, that it was just what mothers do, and maybe that was true. But maybe I just never gave myself the space to wonder if I deserved anything back. After the startup failed, things didn't get easier. Nathan stayed with me for a while, said it was temporary. Temporary turned into months, then years, with bills that somehow always ended up in my name. I refinanced the house when he missed 2 car payments. The bank clerk looked at me with raised eyebrows, but I signed anyway. Told myself it was just another bridge to get him across. When the credit card collectors started calling, I paid them off quietly. I stopped buying new coats, skipped the dental work I needed, and put off retirement planning like it didn't matter. I told people I was simplifying, but the truth was, I was stretched too thin to admit I was sinking. My 60th birthday came and went. Nathan forgot. No call, no card. I spent the day reorganizing the kitchen pantry just to give my hands something to do. I told myself he was busy, that young people get distracted, that love doesn't always look like attention. But it was getting harder to lie to myself. harder to keep pretending this was still about love and not about keeping the pieces from falling apart. Sometimes he'd say he just needed a little help, just until next month, just until things picked up. I always said yes. It felt automatic, like breathing, like saying no would mean cutting off something vital, something sacred between us. But the truth was more complicated. I wasn't just helping him, I was holding back my own life to keep his running. Somewhere in the blur of all those years, I stopped asking what I needed. Stopped thinking about vacations or birthdays or friends I hadn't seen in ages. My world shrank to whatever size Nathan required. I told myself that's what love does. But one night, lying awake in the same bed I'd slept in for 30 years, I felt something shift. Maybe this wasn't love. Maybe this was a kind of survival I had mistaken for motherhood. And maybe the more painful truth was this: he never asked what it cost me, and I never made him. The morning after I got back from the airport, I made coffee like always. The house was cold and still, the kind of still that doesn't leave you alone. I sat at the kitchen table, fingers wrapped around the mug, watching the steam rise. It should have been just another quiet morning. But something inside me felt different, like a door had closed during the night. Not slammed, just gently, latched with finality. I reached for my phone without thinking, a habit formed over years of checking Nathan's accounts, making sure his payments cleared, making sure nothing bounced. His name was still listed as a secondary user on 3 bank accounts. Still had his name on the credit card I rarely used. Still marked as my emergency contact. Emergency. The word stopped me. What kind of emergency leaves your mother standing alone at an airport curb in the snow? I tapped into the settings. My breath stayed steady. My hand didn't shake. There was a button at the bottom of the screen, freeze access. I hovered for a moment. Not because I doubted it, but because it felt like crossing into something new. Then I tapped it. A prompt appeared, confirm action. I didn't hesitate. Yes. The screen blinked. Then again, access suspended pending authorization renewal. And just like that, he was out. The debit card would fail. The bills he linked to my name would bounce. I set the phone down, stared out the window as the wind blew across the yard. It felt like nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. I wasn't angry. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even proud. I just felt still. Like a part of me had stopped running to keep up with someone who never looked back. An hour later, the first text came in. Mom, the account's acting weird. My card's not working. Can you check? I read it, then let it sit. No greeting, no apology, just expectation. Old instincts stirred. The ones that used to rush in and smooth everything over. The ones that convinced me love meant always fixing what someone else broke. But they didn't move me this time. They flickered, then quieted. A second text came 5 minutes later. Hello? I turned the phone face down. No reply, no explanation, no drama. Just silence. Sometimes silence speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. I walked to the study and opened the drawer where I kept the files. Medical directives, power of attorney, beneficiary forms, all with Nathan's name neatly printed. One by one, I pulled them out, laid them flat on the desk, a slow breath in, a slow breath out. New contact, a trusted friend from church. New proxy, someone who had shown up without needing anything in return. New beneficiary, a women's shelter I'd volunteered with during my nursing years. Each form I changed felt like a stitch being pulled from a tight seam, the kind that pinched but never quite tore. It wasn't anger driving me. It was something quieter, more honest. A few years ago, I had surgery, nothing major but serious enough. I told Nathan weeks ahead of time. He said he'd be there. He wasn't. He never showed. Called 2 days later, said something had come up at work. I remember waking up groggy in the hospital bed, the nurse checking vitals, the hallway quiet. I looked toward the door expecting to see his face. Instead, there was just a crack of fluorescent light spilling across the tile. That was the day I stopped believing I came first, but it took years to say it out loud. Now, I didn't need to say it, I had lived it. And I was finally choosing to stop living that way. When I finished updating the documents, I slipped them into a new folder. Labeled it clearly, My Life. I sat back in the chair staring at the old framed photo of us on the shelf. Nathan 6 years old with a missing front tooth and sticky cheeks. Me smiling, tired, proud. I didn't regret that version of us, but I no longer owed him the woman who gave up everything to stay in his shadow. That night he called, I didn't answer. The phone rang again, then again, I let it. Silence when chosen with clarity isn't empty. It's full of every no you couldn't say before. and I was finally ready to stop apologizing for needing peace. It started with a post on Callie's page. Just a few lines, nothing specific. A soft-voiced complaint about people changing when money gets involved. She didn't mention me by name, but the timing was no accident. The comments poured in, little prayers, thinly veiled jabs, strangers reaching for stories they didn't understand. A few days later, Nathan posted something similar, said he was worried about a loved one, said she was being isolated, influenced by others. He ended the post with a broken heart emoji and a quote about betrayal. I saw it all. I always saw it. I took screenshots, every post, every comment, every attempt to reframe the story from their side. I didn't reply. I didn't ask them to take it down. I didn't tell them I'd seen it. Instead, I opened a folder on my computer and saved everything. Dated it, labeled it clearly, just in case. My friend Anne from church sent me a message that afternoon, asked if I'd seen what Callie wrote. I told her I had. I told her I wasn't worried. Because I wasn't. Not really. What people say in the heat of embarrassment always finds a way to burn them back. The truth has patience. It doesn't chase applause. It just waits for the noise to settle. That week, I made soup and read the same mystery novel twice. I walked every morning bundled in my coat, watching the leaves gather at the edge of the sidewalk. Nathan didn't call, Callie didn't message, but their posts kept coming. Every time someone tagged me, I removed the tag. Every time someone sent a screenshot, I added it to the folder. Anne came over one night with a pie and a look on her face, like she wanted me to fight back. I told her not yet. I told her some storms are better watched from inside the house. She raised an eyebrow and poured the tea. She didn't press me. She didn't need to. Because she knew what I knew. Power doesn't live in who shouts the loudest. It lives in who holds the receipts. The envelope arrived on a Thursday morning. No return address. Just a thick white envelope slipped under my front door. I opened it slowly, not surprised. I had seen the signs, the tone of their posts, the silence that followed when I didn't answer. It was official. Nathan was suing me, petitioning the court for financial guardianship. His claims were bold: emotional decline, poor judgment, allegations of manipulation by outside influences. I read the entire document twice. Then I folded it neatly and placed it on the table beside the teapot. My hand didn't shake. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer, Ms. Patel. We had met weeks earlier when I first updated my paperwork. She answered on the second ring and said she'd expected this. The hearing was set for 2 weeks later. I spent the days in quiet preparation, not panic, not fear, just truth. Ms. Patel built the case with calm precision. Bank statements, message logs, screenshots, voicemails, all filed, all numbered, all ready. The day of the hearing, I wore a slate gray suit and a soft blue scarf. Nothing flashy, just strong lines and warm tones. I walked into that courtroom with my shoulders back. I didn't look at Nathan. I didn't need to. The judge was a woman in her early 60s. Her eyes were sharp. Her voice was even. Nathan sat across the room with Callie at his side. Their lawyer, young and too eager, kept flipping through a folder that seemed far too thin. They went first, talked about confusion, claimed concern, painted a picture I barely recognized. The judge listened, took notes, her face unreadable. Then Ms. Patel stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't wave her hands. She simply spoke. "We're not here for emotion. We're here for evidence." She opened her folder and began. Exhibit A: text messages requesting funds with false details. Exhibit B: bank records showing thousands transferred for personal spending. Exhibit C: a voicemail of Nathan saying he'd gain control soon once I was out of the way. The room fell quiet. Even the judge leaned back, her pen frozen in midair. Ms. Patel turned to me, asked one question: "Have you ever been evaluated for cognitive decline?" I said yes, last month, full assessment, results no concerns. The judge requested a copy. Ms. Patel handed it over. When it was time for a ruling, the words were brief. All claims dismissed. The suit deemed frivolous. Costs to be paid by the plaintiff. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just stood, nodded to the judge, and walked out. Outside, the air felt clearer, not lighter, just cleaner. That courtroom hadn't given me back power. It had confirmed what I already knew. Silence may not shout, but truth never stumbles. It simply waits its turn. The week after the hearing, I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. No noise in the house, no texts lighting up my phone, just me, a warm mug of tea, and the sound of my own breath. I logged into my bank accounts and moved everything into a trust. My name, my terms, no co-signers, no loopholes. Then I clicked on a bookmarked listing I had saved months earlier. A small home near the Oregon coast. White siding, blue shutters, a porch just big enough for a rocking chair. I didn't hesitate. I filled out the paperwork, called the agent, transferred the funds. It wasn't a backup plan. It wasn't hiding. It was a choice. 3 weeks later, I arrived with 2 suitcases and a heart I was still learning how to listen to. I stood in the doorway and let the sea air settle against my skin. It smelled like salt and pine and clean beginnings. The house had 3 rooms, a modest kitchen, a fireplace that crackled when it rained. The bedroom window looked out toward a field of tall grass. No one here knew my name. That was the point. I could just be Evelyn, no one's emergency contact, no one's fallback. I hung up a wind chime on the porch, bought a kettle I'd been eyeing for years, planted rosemary by the front steps. Most mornings I walked down to the beach with a thermos in hand. The waves moved without permission. The gulls didn't ask to be liked. It took a while to let go of the quiet checking, that urge to look at my phone, to wonder if someone needed something, if Nathan had texted again. But each day it faded just a little more, and in its place something new began to grow. At the local library, I offered to lead a workshop once a week. Just an hour, nothing formal, just a circle of women with open notebooks and tired eyes. I called it Financial Clarity for Women Over 60. A few showed up the first time, then a few more the next. We talked about the ways we had bent too far, paid for too much, loved so hard it left our names off the paperwork. I shared what I had learned, not as an expert, but as someone who finally stopped waiting for permission. They asked questions about trusts, credit loans, documents. We laughed when the terms got confusing. We cried when they didn't. By the 3rd month, we had a mailing list, a potluck, a room that didn't feel so quiet anymore. There was no bitterness in the lessons, just clarity, just space. I never spoke Nathan's name, not out of anger, but because the story had shifted. I wasn't someone left behind. I was someone who had arrived, whole, still learning, but no longer afraid. On Sundays, I sat on the porch with a blanket around my knees, listened to the wind move through the trees, let the past drift where it belonged. I hadn't vanished. I had landed. And the peace I felt wasn't loud. It was steady, like tide and breath and earned silence. The news came quietly, like most things do when you're no longer looking for them. I was in a small cafe near the market, waiting on a warm bowl of soup. A muted television behind the counter played a local news segment. I glanced up and saw his face. Nathan, mugshot, charges of fraud, misuse of shared accounts, financial coercion. I didn't flinch. I didn't freeze. I just looked away and stirred my tea. The waitress brought my soup, tomato and basil. I thanked her and smiled. There was a time I would have sold my wedding ring to protect him. I would have driven through snow or debt to make things disappear. But that time had passed. He hadn't fallen because I pushed him. He had fallen because I stepped aside. Back home, I opened the drawer where I kept his last message. The one he sent before everything cracked open. I read it once more. It wasn't an apology. It was panic disguised as care. I folded it again and slipped it into a file marked correspondence. Then I placed that file in a new folder I had started. It was labeled irrelevant. My 70th birthday came on a bright morning. The sun broke, early light spilling over the trees like a quiet promise. I woke up with no calls, no noise, no expectations. I brewed coffee and tied my scarf, took the stone I had kept for this moment from the drawer by my bed. It was smooth, pale gray, and etched with one word, release. It was a gift from Marjorie, one of the women in my workshop. She had handed it to me after class one afternoon with a small nod. You'll know when it's time. I walked to the shoreline alone. The tide was low, the sand cool beneath my shoes. I held the stone in my palm, heavy but not burdensome. The waves moved in slow breaths. The sky was soft, brushed with hints of gold and lavender. I didn't speak. I stood with the water touching my ankles, wind tugging at my sleeves. I looked out at the line where sea meets sky. Then I let the stone go. It arced once, twice, then vanished beneath the surface. I didn't wait for the splash. I just stood there. There were no tears, no music, no big release of emotion. Just space, inside me, around me. That afternoon, I signed the final documents for my coastal residency, a long-term lease, my name alone on every line. I placed the signed forms beside my passport and a fresh journal. I didn't write much that day, just one line. Today, I choose myself. Then I closed the cover and left it on the table next to the window where the light always falls just right in the late afternoon. The healing didn't sing, it didn't dance, it breathed. And so did I.